Hello, welcome to the Officio Spotlight podcast. My name is Simon Lipscomb and thank you very much for listening. Today we're going to be tackling the topics of supply chain, risk management and logistics. And I'm delighted to say joining me for this discussion is one of the world's leading academic experts in this field, Professor Richard Wilding, OBE. A man regularly asked for his perspectives by the BBC, ITV and other global media outlets. So I'm sure today he's delighted that he's going to add our podcast to that esteemed list. Richard is a man with so many awards and achievements in this field, it's actually difficult to name them. But to list just a few, it's the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport's Meritorious Award, a National Teaching Fellowship, multiple placements on the most influential supply chain professionals list, and of course, an Order of the British Empire Award for Services to Business in 2013. Richard's career has seen him work in industry and academia, and until very recently, he was the Professor and Chair of Supply Chain Risk Management at Cranfield University. So Richard, thank you so much for joining me for this discussion today. It is really
a pleasure.
And as we said, probably interesting timing. You literally have just retired from your position at Cranfield.
Yeah. Just 2 days ago, I sort of stepped back from Cranfield. I'm sure I'll be going back and doing things and continuing to support, if you like, the profession. I think that's really important. I did have to take a step back to create a bit more time and space to spend time with family and focus on my health. That's the plan anyway. So we'll see how that goes.
And my first question, I'm really interested because that felt, I'm sure, a huge personal milestone. But you've been there, I think, for nearly 24 years, so a considerable.
Yeah, that's right. Basically, I started my career in industry. That's where I was very much in production management, manufacturing systems engineering, things like that. I worked in metals industry, but also very much ceramics, making bricks. I was a production manager for a brick plant many years ago, and I accidentally fell into academia. I think that's the best way to describe it. I was at the time, I was a professional engineer, chartered engineer, and I started work with the world famous Warwick Manufacturing Group with Professor Kumar Bhattacharya, who became Lord Bhattacharya and has had a massive impact on things just globally, education in manufacturing and so on and so forth. And then I moved to Cranfield in 1998. I sort of transitioned across there, and that's where I've been since. So it's been quite an interesting journey. Tried to escape from academia a couple of times in the past, but never quite managed it. I do, Simon, describe myself as a pracademic, and I think that's important. I'm a practitioner academic. I mean, my roots are very much in practice, but I also do the academic side of things. There are colleagues who are what you would define more as professional academics. I don't quite fit that mold. So,
actually, Richard, that was one of my questions is, you have obviously done that job of an academic within supply chains. As you look back, I was just curious to get your perspective on, really what the job of an academic in supply chain is.
Well, I think the thing about sort of being an academic, if you're thinking about, how a university measures you and looks at the role, there are a number of key elements. And really what we often talk about is leadership. So, you will have academic leadership, the leadership within the university context, as it were, and maybe slightly more broadly. But also then there's really, I guess, another couple of pillars. First of all, research. And of course, research, from a supply chain perspective is very practice related, but, you're trying to sort of basically thought leadership and doing, academic research.
Yeah.
But then also there's teaching, and the teaching actually forms into a number of different areas. So you will have, if you like, those degree awarding programs, which are, master's programs and things like that.
Yeah.
But also, very importantly, this is the area which I absolutely love, is executive development. So big part of my career has been focused around executive development. How can we develop the profession? So you've also got that side of executive development side of things, which is also taking place. So this is really building the skill base amongst the profession. It's, yes, we have those degree programs, and those are very, very important for individuals and organizations to move forward. In recent years, we've had the apprenticeships, of course, and some of the Cranfield degree programs have been able to sort of support the apprenticeship. So you have those different pillars, the leadership side of things, research side of things, and then of course the teaching side of things. And that's really the core elements or the core plates you're having to spin all the time.
That makes sense. As you look back on those nearly 24 years, I'm curious how supply chains have changed, their importance within businesses, and just generally your perspective on that. I'm assuming things have changed, but I'd love to get your view on that.
Yeah, first of all, if we go back to really when I first accidentally fell into academia, which was 1991, you have to remember that the concept of supply chain management was very much in its infancy, as we know it today. I mean, there's been supply chains around for millennia, but supply chains as we know it today, if you like, the term supply chain management was really only really defined in about 1982, I think it was. It's actually, it's that sort of late. So when I sort of came into academia, supply chain management as we know it was very much in that development phase of what are the elements which are actually coming about from this. My first area of work, and if you like research, was really around sort of it was dynamic behavior of supply chains, which ultimately was all about risk management in supply chains. So what we have to do is to get the journey in perspective, that some of the stuff which has taken place has just, we have come so far in such a short period. And I think that's one of the things that I've seen. So, when you're actually looking at doing just literature searches in the library, for example, now everything's online, you can access it everywhere. I'm really just trying to highlight that, what's changed. It's a different world now.
Yeah. And to that point, Richard, I mean, we've just come out of the pandemic. We've got the war in Ukraine. We're now in a period of high inflation, which I guess, again, a lot of people generationally will have never even experienced before. It feels like the topics of supply chains particularly are higher in the public conscious than, certainly in my perspective, they've ever been. I guess, do you feel the same? And then a follow-on question, and do you think this period has fundamentally changed the way businesses look at supply chain, the places supply chains have in their business, or is it just a blip and we'll be back to business as usual pre-pandemic?
I think that the bottom line is that what people are realizing now is the supply chain is the business. If you're doing anything, it doesn't matter how clever you are with this and that and everything else, it's the supply chain is the business. And I think that has very much been highlighted over the last couple of years. And we have to remember, I think it's the musician Jack White.
Jack White, yes.
I think it was with the White Stripes. His latest tour was the Supply Chain Issues tour. And somebody contacted me saying, "Oh, you should be the warm-up act, Richard." I'm not quite sure. I mean, it is now in common language. We've heard the Prime Minister talking about supply chains. We hear about politicians talking about supply chains. We hear about the press talking about supply chains. Everybody realizes that supply chains impact our lives. We've seen the vaccine rollout, PPE, basically the crazy world of the stockpiling crisis we had at the beginning of the pandemic, the shortage for some strange reason of toilet paper. Just all these things have supply chains supporting them. And I think that everybody's recognized now the importance of this. It didn't magically arrive. There was, if you like, these hidden heroes within the logistics, supply chain and procurement profession who were really ensuring that the goods and services were being supplied to people. And if we're getting this right, you shouldn't notice anything. I remember working with one particular organization, and they're a specialist logistics provider for rock concerts. But I was chatting to the director of this business. I said, "So you've met U2, you've met Kylie Minogue, you've met all these people." And he goes, "No." He says, "If I meet the artists, it generally means that something has gone horribly wrong." He says, "What I want to do is, when we're doing our job, the stage setups, everything else, the stages need to be in the right place. They'll be using rail to actually move some of these things around. Sometimes they're having like 3 sets. They've got one being built, one being taken down, and one on the move." Right. So you start to think about the logistics of that. Really, really interesting. But he was actually saying, no, we shouldn't even know it's happening. Yeah. And I think that's been the world we've been in. It's only in the recent last couple of years where disruptions have occurred that people actually now notice, gosh, there's this thing called a supply chain. It's worked all these years absolutely fine. But at the moment, there are bits of it which aren't working the way we'd want them to. And that's giving us issues.
And Richard, because you will advise very senior people in companies around the world on this topic all the time. I mean, what in practical terms, what are you seeing companies do differently as they come out of this period of pandemic, or as we move into this period of high inflation?
I think one of the big things is that people are starting to think about procure for resilience rather than for cost. So at the end of the day, if you go back to the old normal, everything was very much cost-based. We're going to want this cheaper and everything else. Well, yeah, you can get anything as cheap as you like, but if it doesn't arrive, it's a bit pointless. So now people are saying that, and they're recognizing it's actually worth paying a little bit more for reliability and availability and so on and so forth. So that is, if you like, quite a big change. The other thing is then, if you like, the restructuring of supply chains. So we're starting to see, can we onshore? Can we near shore, bring stuff closer? But also importantly, can we multi-shore? And I think that this, from that risk perspective is quite important. It's not about multi-sourcing, because, I was working with one company and they said, oh yeah, we multi-source. We thought we were going to be fine. We didn't realize all our suppliers were in northern Italy and the whole place was shut down. It makes no difference. So we've got to look at different shores to be able to actually make this work. I mean, just yesterday I was talking to a coffee supplier for one of the big fast food restaurants, and this is something which they're having to really think about. It's like we're sourcing coffee, but yes, it's grown all over the world. They used to focus on, say, certain markets. Now what they're doing is they're just having to look at multi-shoring, so they know where they can go if there's a challenge in one place or something else going on somewhere else. And I think that's core with, if you like, supply chain risk management, is having a culture of supply chain risk management, that when somebody ask the question, I'm going to change my sourcing location, I don't know, from China to India, how will that impact the risk profile of the supply chain? That's the question we need to ask. Every decision I make, even if I'm in HR and I'm recruiting these people, how could that ultimately impact the risk profile of the supply chain? That needs to be the question at the front of everybody's mind, because that's what we're having to really sort of manage and think through at the moment.
Yeah. That makes sense. One of the things that you've done recently is a LinkedIn learning course on building resilient supply chains for effective risk management, which I've done and I think is great. I certainly learned a lot. I was just really interested to understand what led you to do that. And also, I'm assuming people have been through that. You've got feedback and perspectives. Yeah, just love to understand a little bit more about that.
It's really interesting because I've always sort of pioneered during my academic career. One of the things that I've always wanted to do, as I said earlier, is how can I take, if you like, this academic knowledge and create action in industry?
Yeah.
And one of the problems is in academia, I would argue now, my colleagues will have to forgive me, but to be quite honest, a lot of the stuff which is done, so if I'm writing an academic paper, generally an academic paper is there to entertain other academics. It does nothing for practitioners, right? Okay. So one of my goals has always been, how can I do something with it? So fellow academics will look at my academic publications and they go, well, Richard, they're a bit mediocre, aren't they? And to be quite honest, I'd agree, because that isn't the audience I want to target. I want to actually target those people who are actually, out there. So actually, what are the things that most practitioners are doing? They'll read short blogs. They will, listen to podcasts like this. They'll be tuning in on other things. They're wanting things in a slightly bite-sized format. So the LinkedIn learning project I got involved with, it actually started in 2020. And so it actually goes back some time. They just started saying, oh, we're thinking of doing this. And I said, yeah, I'm interested. We'll, try and get it all moving and sorted. Yeah. And so it was literally just before lockdown that got this thing moving. But then due to LinkedIn learning supply chain disruptions, it didn't quite happen, because the original plan was that I'd be flying out to California, which was part of the reason I thought that sounds like quite a good gig.
Nice.
I'll go out to their recording studios and do it there. Yeah. But they had to completely adapt. And, although, the material was actually put together, and that process is really interesting.
Right.
Because what you have to do is this has to be something which is incredibly accessible to everybody.
Right.
So you have to completely remove, if you like, the jargon. So the goal is how can I present the complexities of supply chain risk management in a way that anybody can relate to it? And I hope that came over, Simon, when you were going through the course.
It did.
You're sort of going through and you're writing stuff which I completely understand.
Yeah,
and, the audiences I normally talk to completely understand. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to make this so into a language that a human resources professional will understand, who knows nothing about supply chain or supply chain risk.
Yeah.
Everybody will understand it, so it's totally accessible. And what's great about the course is it's 23 3 to 5 minute little videos. It's little videos, but what I've been hearing is a lot of people actually listen to it as well, which is great. So, I've had like managers contact me saying, I'm listening to this in the gym, and everything else. And I firmly believe, I'm biased on this, but the biggest source of risk to companies at the moment is the supply chain.
Yeah.
So if I had a company, I'd make it compulsory that everybody should do that little course. Yeah. We have to do courses on fire safety. We have to do courses on data protection and this, that, and the other. I have to do at the university, you have to do those on an annual basis. But actually, when we start to think about where the risks are coming from at the moment, some of the biggest risks are coming from the supply chain. Here's a course, incredibly accessible. I would hope that everybody could actually go through this and engage with it and get some stuff out of it. You can use it if you're really experienced as a checklist of ideas, but also gives people pointers from all my years of experience and everything else that should really help people move forward. But it was a really interesting journey. And guess where it was filmed? In my house here, because they couriered all the film equipment to my house, and then we had a direct connection through a laptop to California. So we had somebody in California, a couple of producers in the UK, and they took controls of the camera and everything else. And then I literally we had auto cues running, we had everything. And it was done in my house. In the end, it was February this year. So it was all done then. So I then apparently got a world record for the number of videos that I could do in a day. They've blocked out a load of time. And I'm pretty good at talking to camera, as you're probably noticing. So I was just like banging through these things. Yeah, so we got it all done. And then LinkedIn do a fantastic job then just sort of producing it. You once I've done my filming, it all goes to them and they listen to it and things like that. And then they create graphics from it. And I didn't have any input really into that. Right. I'm really pleased with the result. And hopefully everybody else was quite impressed with it as well.
And I can also say, Richard, your house looks both lovely and was extremely tidy. So
yes, the shot looks fantastic. It looks like this office, actually.
Richard, it's been a fascinating conversation. I'm probably my last question, just purely as a function of time. Again, coming back to your recent retirement from Cranford, I saw a lovely LinkedIn post you put up, and you had a reference to proverb on there about as iron sharpens iron, one person sharpens another. I was just really interested to understand who sharpened you over the course of your career.
So, I look at my career and I sort of, I reflect on, the people who you've just worked with. So, Kumar Bhattacharya, he took me into the Warwick Manufacturing Group. And there I remember, people who I really learned were Edward Sweeney, Professor Edward Sweeney. I think he's at Heriot Watt now. So, a shout out to Edward, learned a lot from him on running courses. But then Gordon Brace, he was a real professional, supply chain guy. And he's the guy who said with my PhD, he says, there's this thing called supply chain. You ought to have a look at it. Then, of course, there was, Professor Martin Christopher, who I had the privilege to work with for many years. It's been great. I'm still in touch with Martin. It's just an incredible list. But then there's also the practitioners who I've had the joy of working with as well. And, the team at the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, which I chaired, and currently I'm working with on the board of trustees for CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, some incredible senior procurement guys and everything. And I think that this is one of the things that it's actually meeting these people and learning from these people and just seeing the insights they provide have been just great, and just little bits of advice, little nudges. Richard Hunt, who is former chairman of the London Ambulance Authority, I worked with him years ago when I was at Warwick. He used to come and talk about the challenges of putting those little sparkler things in the cans of beers. and how that technology was developed and how they were starting to do that. So there is so many, and I apologize to the people I have not mentioned, because so many people have had an influence on my career. And I think that's the thing. It's just recognizing when we come up with people, we meet people, not just in our professional life, our personal life as well. There's a vicar, a guy called Paul Howard, amazing character who's had such an impact on just on my life. Amazing people. And I think that's the thing that we have to appreciate, is during our careers we end up meeting so many different people from completely different perspectives, and if we all hang out with our own little group, I've done talk about one of my goals, which I talk about, is networking networks. That's where innovation comes about. Innovation is taking ideas which are new to you and creating economic or social or environmental value. So if I'm trying to get ideas which are new to me, how can I network networks? How can I, reach out and be with people? And that's an awful lot of fun, and that gives me a lot of joy. And that proverb, is iron sharpens iron, one person sharpens another. That is so important, and we all need to recognize that and be able to move on. My other favorite proverb is actually Winston Churchill. It's not really a proverb, it was one of the statements he said, which was, and I actually got it written down here, is success is going from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm. Right. And that has also been a key thing in my career. You've got to try things. And I think the problem is that for many people in many environments now, they become too risk averse. I was lucky in my first role in production management. I had a big production director, and he said to me, Richard, I want you to make decisions. He says, as long as 70% of them are right and the other 30% don't become too expensive, I'm happy. Right, just make decisions. So having permission to fail is core to people's careers and moving forward. Sadly, many organizational cultures now don't allow failure, and then we don't get innovation. Everybody plays safe. So failure to failure with enthusiasm is where success comes from.
Richard, that seems like a really appropriate place to draw the conversation to a conclusion. And thank you again for taking the time to talk to me. It's been fascinating. Look forward to all the things you do going forward. I mean, as you into the next stage of your career. When we publish this podcast, we'll put links to your LinkedIn Learning course. Again, hoping not to speak on your behalf, but I'm sure if people have any views, and you'd love to hear from them. And we can...
very much so. No, we've had some good feedback, and also some bits of feedback where people are saying, "Oh, could you do a bit more of this and everything else?" I think the big challenge is, how can you do probably a year's worth of stuff into 23 short videos? There's always more you can say, but hopefully it covers off the key things. But thank you, Simon. It's been lovely talking to you.
Lovely. Thank you, Richard. If you enjoyed this podcast, please click the follow button on your chosen podcast platform. We'd also absolutely love to hear your views. So please do leave us a review on those platforms, or indeed send me a message on LinkedIn. And we'll be back soon for another discussion with senior industry figures.